Today's video is a report from a soldier who fought in the Second World War. We have made a conscious decision to translate these accounts as they are. These historical sources have not been censored by us and are therefore not neutral. They are the stories and thoughts of people socialized in a time that cannot be compared to our own. Accordingly, some of the statements and political opinions of the protagonists are inappropriate for our social climate. We explicitly distance ourselves from any political statements and radical opinions expressed by the people portrayed here.
To this day, some of the Cherkasy survivors meet every year, but I don't want to talk about it. It was terrible. When we reached the front, the misery was not over, because we were wet and it was about -7 degrees Celsius. Our uniforms froze within minutes, and it was very hard to walk. We were lucky that there was a small village nearby. We took shelter in the houses and lit every fireplace in the village to keep warm at night. It took help to get rid of the outer layers of clothing. Then I fell into a deep sleep. We had all been without sleep for at least 30 hours, and had been through hell. When I woke up, someone had stolen my coat, which surprised me, because stealing among comrades was unheard of in the Waffen SS. But I didn't blame the soldier. We were all at the end of our tether. Nobody could think rationally anymore. The next morning we found out who had died and who was still alive. Luckily, my commander, Walter Schmitz, survived, but not enough made it. Then we had to march on quickly through several small towns. T-34 tanks were sighted several times in the area. The tanks had broken through on the flanks to search for us and destroy us. Fortunately, it was foggy and the tanks did not spot us. We fought our way through about 50 kilometers to the nearest railway station. The regiment gathered there. The whole regiment got into one wagon. That was all that was left of it. We were told that we would be transported to Germany, and that the regiment would be replenished there. Some of us had been at the front for 18 months. We all wanted a few days' rest. But the train stopped at Lublin, and from there it went no further. There were already some German associations in Lublin, for example, the German Women's Association. They were waiting for us at the station. The women held up banners saying, "Welcome fighters from Cherkasy." Of course, we were proud. We asked the women where we could get a good meal in the city. They recommended a German restaurant 20 minutes from the station. Me and 2 other soldiers went there. We were hardly recognizable as soldiers. We had no weapons and only parts of our uniforms. Nevertheless, we were warmly welcomed into the restaurant and immediately given something to eat. Then 2 pretty girls walked past our table, and I immediately stood up and asked them if they would like to join us. They did, and we all had a good chat. After a while, one of the girls asked me if we would like to go to her place. Her name was Gisela. A short time later, we were at her home, and I was able to take a hot bath. It was wonderful. Later there was wine and more good food, and then we went to bed. It was so beautiful that we lost track of time. The next morning I woke up with a start, not knowing how long our transport would be at the station. Gisela organized a small coach for me. There were many of them in Lublin, and they worked like taxis. When I arrived at the station, the train had already left. Damn it. But luckily there was a Wehrmacht ambulance train. They gave me a military belt so that I no longer looked like a civilian. Suddenly my comrade, with whom I had been drinking the night before, came around the corner. The soldiers from the ambulance train were able to tell us that our unit had gone to Chelm, about 60 kilometers to the east. So we had to take a civilian train from the Polish railways. It was a bit strange, and we didn't have any weapons, but there was no sign of partisans or civilians trying to harm us. In Chelm, we asked for the way to the headquarters. At the entrance, we met the company sergeant, who was glad to see us. He had been afraid that the partisans had caught us. I asked him how the soldiers were. He said they were being deloused and given new clothes. Then I reported to the regimental commander. While I was talking to him, a drunken soldier stood behind him and imitated him. I found it hard not to laugh. The soldiers were celebrating their survival with alcohol. We had a lot of fun. On the wall of our barracks was written in large letters, "Always enjoy your life, for you will be dead longer than you are alive." I was nicknamed Little King by our commander. I got this nickname because I was incredibly lucky. It was like a miracle that I survived the most hopeless situations. When we were surrounded by the Russians, many soldiers said, "If anyone gets out, it'll be Little King." But they also called me Little King because I was so small. As I said, I was actually too small to be accepted into the Waffen SS, but even there I was lucky. My commanding officer had of course noticed that I had disappeared one night. He asked me if it had been worth it. I answered, yes. Then he took a bottle of whiskey from behind his back and said, "Cheers, that was the end of it." There was a police cavalry battalion in Chelm. I was given a new Schwimmwagen. My driver was Heinz. He also survived the war, and I am still in touch with him. When we got the Schwimmwagen, I told him we had to take it for a test drive to Lublin. We were only allowed to drive through Chelm in a convoy because the commander of that police battalion had been shot by partisans a few days before. That's why the guard at the entrance didn't want me to go, but I assured him that I would catch up with the last convoy. That was nonsense because the Schwimmwagen had to be driven in, and we were ordered not to go faster than 30 kilometers per hour. To be on the safe side, we took a machine gun with us. It took a while, but we arrived safely in Lublin. Gisela was waiting for me. The following days in Chelm were good. We got new soldiers whom we immediately began to train, and I had a Polish shoemaker make me decent boots. And we made friends with the police battalion. I am still in touch with one of the soldiers, a dentist from Wiesbaden. Suddenly the alarm sounded. We had to go to the station immediately and were sent out on the next mission. We couldn't believe it. Only a few days had passed and we had received some new soldiers, but no new vehicles apart from a few Schwimmwagen. That was the first and only time I wrote to my family that I no longer believed we would win the war. The Russians had broken through to the north of us. I think the place was called Kaul. There were supply units and railway workers surrounded by Russian units. Herbert Giller, our division commander, had himself flown to the surrounded units in a plane, which was very dangerous. He said, "My boys will get me out of there." We held off 3 Russian attacks without suffering any casualties. After that there were some tougher battles, but we weren't alone. We had a tank regiment supporting us. It was led by Hauptsturmführer Karl Nicolucci, who was awarded the Knight's Cross for this action. We drove the Russians out and advanced into the town. There were no Russians there either. It was the 22nd of April, 1944. I remember this day because it was the day I became a lieutenant colonel. I don't know how, but the regimental commander got us a cow, which we slaughtered and had a wonderful meal. The battalion command post knew nothing about it, and the men were hungry, so I had some pieces of meat brought to them. After a few days, we were relieved by a Wehrmacht unit and moved to a military training area near Krakow. There we received new soldiers and trained them day and night. We were preparing for the next operation. There was also a front theatre. Dutch women with violins gave a beautiful concert there. It was June 1944, and there was another alarm. The battalion was loaded into lorries and we were ordered to stop a 60-kilometer frontal breakthrough and push the enemy back. Everything had to be done quickly. Once again, it wasn't a nice job for us. We managed to push the enemy back with heavy losses, but we were up against superior forces. There wasn't enough ammunition in the world to win this war. After 13 days of fighting, I was wounded for the 6th time. T-34 tanks broke through and fired explosive grenades at us. I jumped into a ditch, but shrapnel hit my upper arm. Once again, I was incredibly lucky. Many of my comrades did not survive the attack. I was treated behind the front line. The senior doctor had known me for a few years when he operated on me to remove the shrapnel. He asked me if I didn't want to give up. He wanted to write me a referral to a military hospital. But I didn't want that. My comrades were waiting for me. I recovered with the units behind the front. There was a cook who looked after me so well that after 14 days I was twice as strong as before. My problem was that I couldn't eat before fights, and I lost a lot of weight while we were fighting, but the cook gave me bacon and good food. Then I was allowed to go home for 3 weeks to recover from my injury. On the 10th of October 1944, I had to go back to the front and report to my regimental commander. There I met my old friend Gert Lotz, who had also returned to the front after being wounded. We drank a schnapps to greet each other, but no sooner had we finished than the alarm sounded. We had to leave immediately. The Russians had broken through, this time into the forests of Lepknizka. As soon as we arrived there, all hell broke loose. The Russians shelled our positions for 3 hours with everything they had. We had to retreat and regroup a bit further back. We dug foxholes. When you've been fighting on the front line for so many years, you can tell if an artillery shell is going to land near you just by the sound of it. I said to my comrades, "Take cover!" We jumped under the truck. We had buried the trucks to protect them from shrapnel. They were well protected under the truck, except for one direct hit. We took a direct hit. The grenade hit the truck exactly. My right calf was shredded, my left leg and ankle were shattered, and a piece of shrapnel stuck in my cheekbone. I can't remember everything, but I do remember being put on a tank and being taken to the field hospital behind the front, about 3 kilometers behind the front. There was a barrack, and there were 3 doctors and nurses who worked round the clock. They operated on simple kitchen tables. There were so many seriously injured people that they were lying all over the place. As I was more seriously injured, I was taken inside and did not have to wait outside. I asked a medic if I could have another cigarette. He just looked at me and said, "Smoke your cigarettes while you still can." As I lay there, I saw a doctor removing a soldier's eye. It was madness how quickly this doctor operated. While the medics were bandaging the patient, he was operating on the next. Finally, it was my turn. They put a mask over my mouth. I took 3 breaths, and I was anesthetized. When I woke up, half my body was bandaged. My whole leg was in a wooden splint. I was then taken to a military hospital near Prague. I stayed there for a while, and a lieutenant of the Wehrmacht was in my room. On the 9th of November, we heard Goebbels on the radio saying, "We will dig in, and no political soldier will ever set foot on German soil." We both looked at each other in anger. We couldn't believe that such an idiot could say something so stupid. My knee was stiff and I couldn't move it. The butchers in this field hospital decided to stretch it. It hurt like hell, but the knee was still stiff, just in a different position. After that, I wanted to go to a hospital in Germany. Actually, I was not allowed to. There was an order that wounded officers had to be treated close to the front, so that they could be sent to the front in an emergency. There was a shortage of officers at the time. I was lucky that the staff doctor was not familiar with the ranks of the Waffen SS. An Obersturmführer of the Waffen SS is the same as an officer, but the doctor didn't let me go so easily. I first had to prove that I was fit enough for the long journey. I had to walk across the room without crutches. It was a very long 5 meters, but I did it. There was a beautiful nurse called Annelie. I told her I couldn't walk without crutches. She got me some. I was taken to the railway station in Prague, where I waited for a train to go home. It was a holiday train. It was full, and I had to stand from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. The soldiers were coming back from the front, and they were all asleep, but when they woke up, they made room for me. As the hospital was near my home, I naturally went to see my family first. When my mother opened the door and saw me, she asked, "What do you want?" She didn't recognize me, because I looked so thin and exhausted. When I arrived at the military hospital, I met a priest who was also known as a healer in the area. It's unbelievable, but he managed to fix my knee to some extent. I could move it again. When I was discharged from hospital, I was asked if I would like to train the young people at a Hitler Youth training camp. I was happy to do so. Even in 1944, the boys were enthusiastic and believed in the final victory. During a training session, I gathered the boys around me. I said to them, "If you see Americans, English or Russians on the horizon, throw your guns far away, go home, take off your uniforms and just be good sons." They couldn't believe it. For the boys, Their world had collapsed. They still wanted to fight, but it was pointless to sacrifice youth for a lost war. And if you fought at the front, you knew the war was lost. In the same place there was also a Volkssturm. That's what they called the men who were called up as the last reserve. They were older men and workers. I was asked if I wanted to teach them something. We did some shooting exercises. Afterwards, an older man asked me what he should do if the Americans really came. I told them the same thing I had told the Hitler Youth. You can't imagine how grateful those men were. Then it was March, and I knew the war would be over in a few weeks. As a member of the Waffen SS, I couldn't just take off my uniform and sit down at the table with my mother. Some neighbor would have betrayed me, and I would have gone to prison. We knew this even before it became clear that Germany was losing the war. The closer the enemies came to Berlin, the more the population despised the Waffen SS. I joined our reserve battalion in Erlangen. I thought I would be able to continue there somehow, because I didn't want to be taken prisoner.